Hey folks, welcome back to DIY guitar making. Hey, I've got something a little bit different here, don't I? This is an electric guitar. What's that doing here? We're actually going to do a little repair today. I haven't done repairs in a good bit. I have a couple of them that I've built up, and I'm taking a break from everything else to actually knock out a little bit of repair, which is a lot of fun because I don't do it all the time nowadays. It's a change of pace, and it honestly helps develop my skills in a way that I don't fully get from building by itself. But hey, before we get started, let me just say, if you like what I do, go ahead and check out ericschaferguitars.com for my structured online courses to learn everything you need to know about guitar making, and for my list of upcoming dates for my guitar build workshops here in Burnville, Pennsylvania. So this guitar, I just got off the phone with the customer, and what we decided to do, it's got really pitted frets going about from the first fret up to pretty close to the middle of the fretboard. We could do a partial refret, but it's almost like at that point we might as well just do a full refret. And in that case, whenever I'm doing a full refret, I always like to, if I can talk the customer into it, to use something like Evo Gold or stainless steel. I especially like Evo Gold. Evo Gold is much harder than nickel silver. The reason he has these pits in here to begin with is because the frets are nickel silver, which of course is very common. That's a staple of the industry. But if you can upgrade it to a harder material, I think that's the way to go. We have an opportunity when you're replacing all the frets to use something better. Just like when you replace a nut, you have an opportunity to swap it out for bone instead of more plastic, right? Which, by the way, we are actually doing that as well. We are swapping out this nut. It's got some issues as well. But you know what? I'll probably have to make this into 2 videos just because that's a lot. We've got a lot going on. So we'll stick with the refret for this video. I'll just show you before I get started. I've pulled some of the tools over here which I'll be using. Not all the tools. There's going to be, I didn't think through it completely. I just grabbed some things that I'm pretty sure I'll need. My fret pullers. These, I like this pair that you get from StewMac just because they have a lot of clearance here. You could use any sort of nippers that you have that aren't even related to guitar making. But these specialty nippers from StewMac are pretty great. Soldering iron to warm up the frets before pulling them, and this has a bound fretboard which adds some complexity to the job, so I'm going to be using this special tool. I can't remember what this is called but it's a specialty tool for nipping the fret tang off of the individual pieces of wire so that it fits between the binding without the fret tang damaging the binding. Okay, so that's what that is. I'll throw this up on the screen when I'm editing the video to show you what this doohickey is actually called. And beyond that, probably be using one of my radius beams at some point, and leveling beams and things like that for the actual level and crown. I've got some fret crowning files here, so you'll also need something like this if you're attempting this job. And lastly, some fret dressing sticks to take out the marks on your fret wire and make them really shine. Okay, like I said, there'll be more tools as we come up. I just wanted to give you kind of a starting look at what we'll be doing without going too deep into it. Alright, so let's loosen these strings just a little bit, and then I can cut the strings off. And we'll get started. Alright, so look at those pits. Those are pretty deep, and they go pretty far up the board. So they gotta go. Alright, like I said before, the nut has to go anyway, so we might as well just get that out of our way right now, even though we won't be making the new one until later. So I'm going to get that truss rod cover out of the way. And then gently score the finish all around the nut. It's very gentle. Just so that when I do this, we don't have any finish that kind of washed over onto the nut that's going to then crack and splinter off when we pop the nut off. So there should only be a tiny bit of glue holding this in. Yep. And those were all gentle, just kind of probing for weakness taps there. You don't want to wail on it in case you find out something you didn't know about this guitar, like how someone glued the nut on with something very strong. So in the best case, it should just come off just like that, real easy. So all of this, these little bits, the screws, the nut itself, the truss rod cover, keep them all in a little cup for safekeeping. All right, so I've got this plugged in and warming up, and we're gonna start with an inconspicuous fret. I'm just gonna kind of pick the most inconspicuous one because it might seem logical to start at one end and work down to the other, but hey, there's some unknowns here, and as there is with any guitar you're working on. And so if you're gonna find out any unwelcome surprises, like how the wood's gonna react, how the binding's gonna react, just anything like that, it makes more sense to start, let's say, right here on this fret, okay? You know, you could start at the opposite end and work this way, and then if there's an issue here, it'd be less noticeable, but I think a little bit better to even start like 4 in from the end, because it's just nobody's really looking there, right? Everybody kind of notices what happens up here. That's where you're mostly playing. Down here, less so, and even more again if it's not the very last one, because for whatever reason that one catches your eye a little bit more. That's my thinking behind it. An inconspicuous fret wire to start. All right, so all that rambling gave this some time to heat up. And I'm going to now heat the fret wire with it by running this gently along the length. First, I'm going to heat up the whole fret wire, and I want to be careful around that binding because I can melt the binding with this. And now I'm just focusing on the end. Okay, and I get my nippers under there, starting at one end. And I'm just walking it down the line. And following along with the soldering iron until I get all the way to the other side. Okay, rather than just getting a purchase on one end and then just kind of pulling it up, you want to walk it end to end, and that wasn't bad. That came up great. So that was kind of our test fret, and nothing bad happened. Minimal tear out. Here, I'll pull this down, or chip out I should say. So sometimes these woods like rosewood and ebony, and this is rosewood, will chip very easily, especially ebony. Rosewood's a little kinder. Okay, great. So now we'll go ahead and pull the rest of these. So the reason we do this, by the way, with the soldering iron is because, one, if there's any glue underneath the fret, it softens the glue, of course, but it also warms up the surrounding wood. And the warm wood is much less likely to chip out than cold, brittle wood. Okay, 2 down. Let's keep going. Okay, now that all the frets are removed, we're going to go ahead and clean this up with a little bit of naphtha just to pick up some of this green stuff from corroded frets and the other gunk that's on here. The naphtha will soften it up and help it to come off. And then we're going to sort of further clean this up a little bit with some sandpaper, just to take down some of the burrs from where the frets pulled up. And then we can evaluate where the fretboard is at and see if I want to adjust the truss rod a little bit to kind of level it off before we potentially level the board itself. Okay, if there's any wonkiness in the board, we want to fix that up. Alright, but the first thing is just to clean it up so we can see what we've got. Alright, that looks pretty good. Just take a little sanding block with 220 grit. This is just a scuff sanding. Okay, so if we're going to do any sort of leveling on the board, which I don't know that we are, but if we are, you want to have the board starting out in as straight of an orientation as the truss rod will allow. And this looks really good. Yeah, really good. There's like a slight gap along the middle, but we're talking like 1/1000 of an inch. And then there's a more noticeable drop off down past, I'd say past the 2nd fret, so including the 1st fret. That drops off a little bit, but all things considered, this looks pretty good. Alright, it looks like this radius here is 14 inches. I can use my radius gauge here to figure that out. And so I've got my 14-inch radius block. And I put some 120 grit on here. This really just needs a gentle sanding. Everything is pretty much where it needs to be. I don't need to level everything out. You can really get carried away here. If there's a low spot between the fret slots, like I see these shiny spots like right here that don't quite go away, that's okay. I'm really focused only on the spots where the fret wire are actually going to land and not necessarily the spaces between them, which dramatically changes and limits the amount of work that I might think I need to do. Okay, in fact, that looks really good already. The only thing that's really left here, and I don't even know if I need to even get this nitpicky, but there's a gap that extends from like the 2nd fret to the nut, which is actually fine past the 1st fret. It's fine that it tapers off past the 1st fret because there's no more frets over there, so that's okay. But I'd like to level this down just a little bit so that that 1st fret doesn't sit lower than the 2nd fret. And of course, that is keeping in mind that I don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good here. I just want to make the problem better, not necessarily make the gap go away 100%. Because this is a lot of wood to bring down. You always want to be conservative with your repairs and not overdo it. That gap is probably pretty close to 0.02 of an inch. Yeah, so I can check that with feeler gauges. And if that's only like 1 or 0.02 of an inch, then I'm happy with that. Now my goal with this is to be able to do almost no, or even no, fret leveling. So very little fret leveling, possibly no fret leveling. And that's because I'm putting this work into the board. But again, if your board's really in rough shape, you might want to meet in the middle here, meaning do some work on the board, but then put your frets in, do some work on the frets. Because there's danger on both sides, right? If you overlevel your board, well, the problems there could be pretty obvious. And if you overlevel your frets, then you're stuck with the same problem you started with. Now you have really low frets, and you know, the next time you get pits, you'll need to do another refret. Okay, now that looks really good. I've got almost none of that gap that I had there before, and I actually have just a slight, I mean, it's like 1/1000 of an inch gap on this side over the tongue from like here to here, and that's actually desirable. It's called fall away. So when you get out over the body, you actually want the slightest gap, okay? And that's because this portion of the neck that goes out beyond the body is dynamic and gets pulled forward due to string tension. That gives you your relief, which you need. You need a little bit of relief in the neck. It's what allows each fret to kind of fall away from the one behind it. Now over here, this portion isn't going to be affected in that way by string tension because it's over the body, so we need to fudge in manually a little bit of that relief, which we have now because we have just a hairline gap underneath the straight edge. And the smallest amount of relief is really all you want. Now I should say, you can put that fall away into either the wood of the fretboard or into the frets themselves when you level your frets. If I can get away with it, I like to put it into the fretboard because that's the foundation. And lastly, I do want to mention also that a lot of guitars don't even bother with that. It is just kind of a nice extra thing to make your guitar that little extra bit more perfect. A lot of factory-made guitars, you know, this sort of fussiness about the fall away doesn't even happen. But hey, we're trying to make this a little bit extra special for Frank. That's the guy who owns this. Alright, and that's all the leveling I need with the block, with the 120 grit sandpaper. I've got 220 on one side of this and 320 on the other. This is just a nice soft squishy block. I'm going to use this. I should trim off these ends so I don't hit the finish with it. I'm going to use this to smooth out the 120. Okay, that's good enough. I prefer to do this than putting can't speak. I prefer to do this rather than putting 220 and 320 onto this radius block because I find a nice soft squishy block with that fine of a grit isn't going to change or affect that radius that you've established anyway, and it actually does a better job of progressing through the grits than a hard block with the radius does. Alright, now I'm using this little pick attachment. That's the best thing I can call it. I'm going to use this. This fits perfectly in my slots. You know, I'm pretty sure StewMax sells either this, exactly this, or something similar to this for specifically this purpose. But it's really just a small enough pick to probe in these slots and pull out any big chunks, like what I just pulled out right there, that are left over, often from the process of pulling out those other frets. Might leave a little piece of wood or chip out in your fret slot, and that can really mess up the installation process of your new frets. And sometimes when you have a hard bit that you can't quite pick out, you got to take a saw and cut it out. Now we have the added difficulty of the binding being in our way. We could just take a certain type of hand saw if the binding wasn't there, because the slots would run straight through. But I'm going to show you what we're going to use. Something like this, and you can even make something like this. I mean, it's really just a modified dovetail saw. And this is also what we can use to deepen our slots if we find that we need to. Now let's check two other things. I want to check the slot width. I have a feeling it's slightly larger than the tang of the fret wire I'm going to use, but we'll see. We'll tackle that if we have to. And then the other thing is the depth. Okay, the depth is very important. Our frets will not seat if the slots are not deep enough, and we can always deepen it with this thing right here. Alright, so I can just use a set of automotive feeler gauges. 23 thousandths of an inch is the size of the fret tang that I'll be using. Actually, that fits in really good and really tight. So I think we're in luck here. Let's see what happens if I go a little bit higher than 23. Here's a 24. Can this fit? Not really. All right, that is great. Okay, that simplifies things. Let me talk about that for just a moment, though. There's a couple ways to deal with this, including putting undersized fret wire in there and gluing it in place. But we don't need to talk about that. That can be a bit more complicated. But the other way to deal with this is to crimp the fret tang. I do have a special tool for crimping the fret wire, which I know StewMac sells it. I'm not sure who else, but man, a lot of StewMac tools today. Yeah, you can actually crimp the fret wire, which effectively enlarges it. But we don't need to go there. We've got the right size. Now, to check my slot depth, I have some offcuts from the actual fret wire that I intend to use, this jumbo Evo Gold fret wire. And on these little offcuts, I have filed with a needle file. I've taken the studs off of the tang, the little barbs. So this will just fit freely into the slot like that. And that way, I can go slot by slot and just check. Here, I might as well start in a logical place at the end and work this way. And just check that this actually seats all the way down. Okay. So that tells me that the slot is deep enough. So first of all, let's take some of our fret wire and cut them down to length for each individual fret slot. And I have this block here where I can assemble them. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the numbers listed out. Kind of hard to see because it's faded, but all those holes have a number attributed to them, so I know which fret belongs where. It's just a neat way of organizing it. By the way, Evo Gold comes pre-radiused, like this. I don't even know if you can get Evo Gold right now. I think Jeskar stopped making it. But it'll come back. I mean, when things like that happen, it's only a matter of time before somebody else in the market just picks it up. Especially if it's a popular thing like Evo Gold is. But anyway, when it comes back, just know that it comes pre-radiused, which is actually pretty nice. So we don't have to bend this. It actually doesn't take to a bender too well. Nickel silver being a lot softer takes a nice fluid bend easily. This kind of kinks a little bit when you try to bend it. So, but hey, it always comes in enough of an overbend that you can use it for pretty much any radius fret wire or any radius fretboard. Alright, so I'm going to hold this up to the fret slot, and I want to leave about 1/8 of an inch of overhang on each side. Okay, clip right there. and put this in number 1. Yeah, I really hope that someone else takes up the mantle of selling Evo Gold pretty quickly, because I love this stuff. I actually bought out, I believe, the last 200-foot coils that LMI had as they were, you know, liquidating everything. So I'm pretty good for a while. I think I can ride out the storm of not having Evo Gold. Alright, well now let's start the process of trimming the tang at the ends so that it fits between the pieces of binding. And so we take this little doohickey right here. Well, actually, first I'm going to mark where I want to cut. And once again, I'm going to pick an inconspicuous fret to start, just in case. I mean, you know, it's been a long time since I've done a bound fretboard, a really long time actually. So who knows what I'm forgetting here, and anyway, I don't want to be very obvious by starting with the first fret and messing that one up. Alright, so that tool's great. Sometimes you need to hit the bottom of this with a file afterwards, but actually that looks perfect. The file wouldn't do anything. See how that trimmed the ends? Very neatly. Not sure if you can see that well on the camera. And grab my fretting hammer. Let's move this bag. This is a bag filled with sand. It's actually a rifle rest, so it's going to help with the recoil. So I have that underneath, and I'm going to prop this in place. First do a good hard tap right there. And we're going to do a good hard tap on the other end. Okay, now we're seated at both ends. Now I'm just going to do little taps all the way across. So I seated at the ends first. Good hit there, which leaves a bulge in the middle, and then I just tap a little bit, pushing that bubble towards the center on this side, and then I go to the other side and push that towards the center, rather than going straight to the middle after hitting the ends in, because if you go straight to the middle, you'll pop out one or both of those ends again. Okay, let's go ahead and do this one now. Alright, so far so good. See, now the tang's a little too long, so I'll just trim it back a little bit more. It touches the binding, and I don't like that. There we go, I just took a sliver off. Alright, so we got some shiny, gorgeous looking Evo Gold frets here. I already nipped the ends off, and before we start work on the fret ends, let's go ahead and check this out with a straight edge. This is the fret rocker, which is essentially 4 straight edges in one. So you can check every part of the fretboard by spanning whichever edge you need across only 3 frets at a time. So we'll start with the biggest edge. And there is actually a rock right here, which actually I kind of expected, because we had that little dip on the front edge of the fretboard. Very, very, very slight, but that would make sense with the rock. And then it should be good everywhere else. A little micro rock right there. And I'm just going to go ahead and make a map of all these rocks. And you know, if you put all that pre-work into the fretboard itself, you can really get away with having no rocks whatsoever at this stage. Yeah, this is all fantastic. Yeah, okay. This is great, except for that one little spot right there. And first things first, let's just try whacking it again. That's the simplest thing. So I put the bag underneath the fret, of course, to reduce the recoil. And let's see what that did. And it's gone, but let's see if it migrated. No, that was it. It just needed to be seated a little bit better with the hammer. And now, so we're all good except this first fret, which really what that means, so where did I put my straight edge? So if it's rocking right here, which means it's rocking off of this fret, and we know that everything else is good, so we have essentially a perfectly flat plane from the second fret all the way back, that means that the first fret is actually low. It's just sitting just a hair low, and the reason is because, like I said, it's the fretboard itself. A very slight dip there. Probably inconsequential. I could probably just leave this alone. The other option, you know, it really depends on how much of a whisper of a rock we truly have here, because if it's slight enough and it's only in one place, you truly can just leave it alone. But the way to get rid of that would be to fret level. And so we'd be fret leveling every single fret behind it down to the level of it, which it's a lot of frets, but this I know is not far behind it. So alrighty folks, we can go ahead now and glue these frets in, because I just checked them, as you saw, with my lovely little fret rocker, and they all seem good. If I had some pesky frets that just didn't want to seat all the way, you know, if I returned to it with the hammer and the hammer didn't quite do it, one little thing I would use at that point would be a fret press, the Jaws 2 fret press. Let me get it for you. So it looks a little something like this, and I would glue in those particular frets that weren't seating well. Sometimes the studs just don't hold, and they you can hammer it down all you want, but they'll just kind of return back to the position that they naturally want to hold at. And you can force them down with something like this. It's a StuMac tool, Jaws 2, I think they call it. It's a weird name, but whatever. I'm not in their marketing department. So you can use that and then glue in the fret with it held under the clamp. I don't have that problem right now, so much simpler for me. I get to just run down the line applying paste wax and then running a bead of water thin super glue right along the seam between the fret and the board. All right, so let's go ahead and do just that. So I got some paste wax, lucky me. This is just interesting. I want to show you guys. Look at that. This paste wax cost me $6.89. I'm sure most of you guys are like, so what, who cares, why does that matter? Go look up how much this Johnson paste wax costs right now. Last time I checked, it was about $280 for one tub of this. Utter insanity. I'm not sure exactly why that is. I think there's some regulatory reason having to do with the chemicals that are in here that just, you know, kind of wrecked the price. But anyway, $6.89. Oh, that's great. And this tub will last me virtually forever with what I use it for, which is basically stuff like this. Alright, so I am going to use a little Q-tip here, rub a little paste wax on there, see that? And then I can take my radius gauge here and just use it as a little fence. And so the point of this is to keep the paste wax from running right up against the edge of that fret, because I want the paste wax to protect the board, but if I pile it up in the corner between the metal and the wood, then the CA glue is not going to be able to wick down underneath the fret. Okay, for the next part here, we are going to apply the glue, but first, I am just going to take a shop towel and tear it up into little bits like this. And I'm going to use these little bits to clean up the CA glue as I go, because if I just take a piece right after I run the glue and wipe it right along the edge of that fret, it'll pick up both the paste wax and the glue all at once and in a very clean way. And I want to do that as I go, not try and get all of it at the very end. So that's why I'm going to have a different small piece of paper towel for every single fret. Actually, not even for every single, I'll have two for each fret because I use one piece for each side. Okay, so here's what we're doing. And right away, I'm going to wipe that up. Right away, I'm going to wipe that up. Now, I'm sure some of you guys are horrified by the fact that I haven't put anything over the body to protect it from, you know, super glue, things like that. But if you get really used to using these materials. Well, you know what, I'm not even going to say that. I'm going to say you should do that. Don't do what I'm doing. Protect your surfaces. But I'm just not going to. Alright, so now that I've got all the frets glued in, I'm going to go ahead and level the frets. I've put 320 grit onto this 16-inch leveling beam here. A beam of this size works really great for any fretboard for fret leveling. If you're spot leveling, you want to use smaller tools, you know. These work pretty good for spot leveling, something like that. But for the whole fretboard, this is fantastic. Go ahead and cover up the pickups so we don't get metal shavings or metal dust on there. Now I can go ahead and blue the fret tops, so I'm taking a blue marker. Before I start, let's check. Here I've got my notch straight edge so I can read the board and not the fret tops, because hey, we're trying to level the fret tops. So any sort of wonkiness that's already in the fret tops, if we just use a regular straight edge, that would be confusing our reading of the board, hence the notched straight edge, so that we can ignore the fret tops. And at this point I just want to check. Okay, that looks great. So the guitar is kind of backlit by the window, and I don't see any daylight below this straight edge at all. And that's where we want to be to start out. So I don't have to adjust the truss rod, which I adjusted it before to get to this point, so that's not too surprising. But hey, you know, things change over time, so it's worth double checking again before we start the leveling process. I get rid of my soft squishy neck rest, swap it out with something more solid, so that when I'm leveling, I'm not inadvertently bowing the neck and having it go out of flat that way. And now I'm just gonna take this and go back and forth gently like this, following the radius, but not following the taper of the width of the fretboard. Now here's what I mean by that. If I wasn't paying too much attention to what I was doing, I would probably start turning the tool like this, essentially moving the back end, this side, back and forth like this in my path. See what I mean? And that's because the neck has that tapered shape, right? And so naturally you would think I would want to follow that, but actually the radius is completely independent of the neck taper. So if I'm doing that, I'm actually changing my radius back here as opposed to how it is up here. Okay? So rather, you essentially want to pretend that the neck is just as wide up front as it is in the back, and just go back and forth like that. So you notice how this overhangs more on this side than it does over here. I wish I could explain that better, but I don't know. I think just saying that the radius is independent of the taper, if you kind of sit on that thought for a minute, you'll understand what I mean. Okay, and as I expected, I'm essentially hitting all of the fret tops except for this first fret right here. And that jibes with what I felt with my neck rocker, because if you remember, I was only getting a rock on the second fret because this fret is slightly, just slightly lower than every single fret on here. So essentially I'm lowering all of these frets to that. You don't want to overdo this. And I'm also going to, in addition to using this tool, I'm going to intermittently use my 14-inch radius block. Now, if you didn't have a radius block or a radius beam, you could do the whole thing with just this beam, because it'll follow the radius that's already on there if you're careful with it. But I think it helps kind of rein me in a little bit to have both tools on hand. That way I'm not going to inadvertently do too much on one side with this. Okay, and we just started contacting right there, so I'm done. I'm going to stop right there. See, that didn't take long at all. Because we did all that prep work before. I just wanted to do a very slight, just kind of kissing the tops of the frets, kind of leveling here. And take my straight edge, take a look at that. Yep, that confirms it too. That looks great. I'm going to give a tiny bit of fall away down here over the fretboard tongue. I'm just putting pressure on the front edge of this block. Yeah, and that, I think that's it right there. Yep, I can fit a 1/1000 of an inch feeler gauge underneath down here, so I'm happy with that. I don't want to overdo that. And now fret crowning. So I've re-blued all the fret tops with my blue marker, and I'm just taking my fret crowning file. I like this diamond file here. There's, you know, all kinds of, here's a regular file, not diamond. It tends to leave chatter marks on top of the fret, which you have to, you know, work out later on. So yeah, I like the diamond file, but you can use whatever you have. There are so many different tools for fret crowning out there. It's kind of insane. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking my file and running it across the fret, following that radius, but stopping and being mindful of when I've reduced the blue line to just a thin line right down the center of the fret. I don't even eliminate the line. I want to see just the absolute tiniest of blue left on the very top. And you don't want to do this blindly, by the way, meaning I don't want to just go over the whole fret, even though I only see blue, say for example, in the middle. If I only see blue in the middle, I need to target the middle, okay? Because if I'm working down the other areas as well, then I'm going to lose my radius a little bit, and when we return to the fret rocker, you'll notice that all that work you did to level these is now, you know, kind of ruined again, because you weren't selective enough about where you were filing with this. Okay, so watch what you're doing here. So I'm just getting this end, and there we go. That's enough. And this whole fret just has an even blue line running right down the top there. Let's move on to the next fret. Okay, that looks pretty good. I don't have to worry about the very tips too much because I haven't beveled these yet. Now, of course, you can bevel these first and then do this, and then you don't have to, think about that. You can see exactly where your fret tops are. But in this case, because I'm crowning first before I do the bevels, I'm just keeping in mind that I don't have to obsess over the ends because those are going to disappear. They're going to get beveled in. So I've got a little extra blue on the tip here, but that's fine. I'm just going to leave that and let that get beveled away. Tiny bit in the middle. So I'll target that selectively rather than getting just the whole fret. Okay. All right, that one looks good. Let's move on to the next. And on and on and on. You gotta love the tedious nature of fretwork. Anything you're doing is times 22 in this case. And now I can go ahead and take my file and bring in the fret tangs. So the portion of the fret wire that's extending out. I've put a little piece of tape here just to protect the finish. I'm doing air quotes there because it's tape. I mean, you're going to tear right through it, but just kind of lets me know when I'm right at that point where I'm about to go through the tape. Like there, I've just torn off a piece of tape, so I'm pretty much there at that spot, so I want to be careful. And then I'm also going to take this and hold it at an angle and just eyeball in the bevel. Now here's a little tip. This thing really wants to jump out and skip out over the fret tops. I'm sure if you guys have done this before, you've experienced that, and it's very unsettling, especially when you've done all that fret work. But all you have to do is wrap your thumb around the tool, whether you're doing the bevel or you're bringing in the fret tangs on the side. In both cases, if you wrap your thumb around and let your thumb ride across the fret tops like this, you're essentially anchoring yourself down to the fretboard, which just prevents you from popping up and sliding over the top. So I'll kind of show you what I mean. See, if I'm like this, you look at my thumb, I'm actually pushing down slightly into the fretboard just to guarantee if I'm pushing down, then I can't pop up, right? So it gives me something to lean into. All right, let's do that bevel. So I got my thumb wrapped, pushing down slightly. And that's all there is to it. So I'm just going to take my time here. And get this done. Alright, and so this side is complete. I haven't done the other side yet. But while I have the guitar facing this way, I'm going to go ahead and deburr the ends of these files. So we took the tang back. I keep saying tang, but this is a bound fretboard. So when I say tang, I really mean the excess end of the fret wire. So I brought that in and put the bevel on there. Now you might think that it would feel good at this point, but it really doesn't. It still feels quite sharp, and that's where this little file comes in. Once again, this is another StewMac tool. I just happen to, for fret work, have a lot of StewMac tools. This tool is specialty made for not putting little nicks in the edge of the fret, right? So it has a nice smooth edge here that's slightly rounded so that I don't accidentally dig into the binding when I make this cut, okay? But really any file you have that doesn't have teeth on the edges, and if you already have a file like that doesn't have teeth on the edges but it's still a hard 90-degree edge, if you just blunt that edge just slightly with anything really, the sharpening stone or something like that, then you won't get these little nicks in your binding or in your fretboard when you're doing this. So all I'm doing is a little, very gentle, with no pressure, twisting motion. See that? See how I twist the file so that I meet the crown of the fret. And doesn't take much, because all we're really trying to do is just deburr the edges. I'm not trying to grind away at this with the file. Now in some cases you might have a fret wire where you can just barely feel the bottom of the fret, and it'll always feel sharp if it's essentially if the fret is sitting up just a hair, and so I can kind of feel that right here. And so what I can do is take the side of the file that does have a sharp 90-degree edge. So this file has both. It has the smooth rounded over edge, which is our safe edge, and it has the unsafe edge, which still doesn't have any teeth on it, but it's a hard 90-degree edge, which is actually great that that's on there for just nicking those little ends. Yep, now I can't feel that anymore. Okay, and this all feels pretty good. Alright, and so now finally I'm just gonna rub the whole fretboard down, the frets and the board itself, with 4/0 steel wool. So that's 4 zeros, 4/0. It's the finest steel wool that you'll find out there. It's basically the equivalent of 600 grit sandpaper. So we can go right over the frets themselves, right over the wood of the fretboard. If you remember, we fine-tuned the grit of the wood down to 320. So using 600, the equivalent of 600 grit for the steel wool is totally fine on the wood of the board. We don't need to tape that off or anything. This is also going to clean up the paste wax and any little bit of super glue that we may have gotten on there. And it's going to kind of blend in the work we did on the bevels of the frets. It's just, overall, it's just going to make everything look great. Now, after this, you can tape off the whole fretboard and fine-tune out the metal of the fret wire. You know, you can protect the fretboard with tape and then run sandpaper over the fret wire itself. Just wrap some soft pads in fine grit sandpaper, and you can really get those frets to gleam. But for a more sort of quick and dirty job, this is good enough. I mean, this still will make your frets look really great and nice and new and fresh and exciting. But hey, if you wanted to, if your customer was paying for it to go a little bit further than that still, you would tape off the whole board after this and polish the frets up to whatever you want. I mean, I've seen 8,000 grit. Alright, and that looks pretty damn good. You'll notice, by the way, that the gold color of the fret wire, if you're using Evo Gold, has kind of lost its goldness at this point. It looks a little bit more like nickel silver or, you know, some other chrome colored fret wire, stainless steel, whatever. Just know that, you know, the first time I used Evo Gold, I was disappointed by that fact when I got to this point. But hey, if you let this sit for about a day, the gold actually comes right back. So it's a temporary condition. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it needs to oxidize with the surrounding air or something. I don't know. But all I know is that it kind of chromes out when you do your work with the steel wool at this point. But hey, it comes back a day or two later in all its golden glory, which is great for this guitar because, hey, we've got gold hardware, gold pickups, gold tuners over here, so it's going to match really great with everything that's already on this instrument. Okay, so sometimes I don't know when to stop here, so I think this looks perfect now. And yeah, let me clean up the shavings. As you can see them trying to stick to the pickups. And yeah, take a look at this. There we go, and like I said, that'll be nice and golden tomorrow. And I'll go ahead and do the nut next. I think I said that I would possibly make another video out of installing this nut, but you know what? At this point, I just want to get this back out to the customer. It always takes longer to shoot these videos than I think. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera and just get it done. If you do want to see something like that, though, I've done many videos on making a new nut from a bone blank, and it won't be any different here for this electric guitar. So if you go back in the archives, you can find plenty of videos, and especially if you have access to my online course, Building an OM Acoustic, you definitely get an extremely detailed video on how to make a new nut blank from scratch. Alright guys, I'm going to get this done, and I'll see you guys in the next video that I make. So, bye for now. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.